Hello and welcome to the What's the Story podcast. I'm Jarlath Kyan.
And I'm Victoria Houston. Each week we'll be focusing on the stories that matter to you. Stories about the people and places that make Tyrone so special.
The What's the Story podcast is brought to you by the Northwest News Group, who also print our much-loved newspapers, the Ulster Herald, Strabane Chronicle and the Tyrone Herald. Enjoy the show.
On February 22nd, 2023, Senior PSNI officer John Caldwell was shot multiple times as he finished a coaching session with the junior football team at a sports centre in Omagh. Many of the young footballers witnessed the shooting. More than 30 people have been arrested and 17 people have been charged with various offences related to the murder bid. However, more than 2 years after the shooting on that chilly February evening, no one has been convicted. My name is Kieran O'Neill, and on this week's podcast I'm joined by Ulster Herald journalists Alan Rogers and Callum McGuigan to find out what is happening with this high-profile investigation. Alan, you were the first journalist there that night. What actually happened?
Well, what happened was I had come home after finishing the paper on the Wednesday evening and was getting ready for a fairly relaxing evening when suddenly my mobile phone rang to tell me that there was an incident at youth sport in Omagh. That was probably around about 20 past 7:30. So immediately what I did was I went down there. It's only probably 6-7 miles at the most. And when I got there, the scene was still very much an incident in progress at that particular time. There were a lot of people milling about. There was a number of police. There wasn't the emergency services in terms of the ambulance had left, but the building was cordoned off, but not to the extent that it was cordoned off subsequent to that. So the people who had been at the facility during the shooting incident, they were still inside. On
that, when you arrived there, was it fairly obvious quite quickly that there had been a shooting incident?
Oh yes, whenever I was going down the road, I knew exactly that a senior member of the PSNI had been shot, and there was a lot of uncertainty at that particular time as to what the condition of that officer was. We weren't 100% sure about who it was, but we were 100% sure that they had been shot.
And what was the details then? Obviously it all emerged later on, but at that stage, those early stages, as a journalist, you're just arriving on the scene, it must have still been a bit of pandemonium in terms of there was children involved, there was obviously emergency services on the scene. Can you paint a picture of what happened then, or what you came across?
What I came across, it was a February night. It was quite cold. The youth sport, the lights of the track were still on. There were people moving. Children were being brought up to the cordon and then being let go to their parents. There were people coming out in cars out of youth sport, and I suppose I was talking to a number of them. There was a lot of shock. There was a lot of anxiety among parents as to what had happened and where their children were. And I suppose the police were there. They were still getting accustomed to what had happened. They hadn't the place cordoned off to the extent that it was subsequently. But so it meant that you were a lot closer than might have been the case maybe 2 or 3 hours later.
And you had mentioned there, but this was a deadline day for the Ulster Herald, the local paper. People that maybe don't work in local newspapers don't understand that the deadline for the Herald is about 6-7 o'clock, is it, on a Wednesday night?
Yeah, usually the printing time is around about half 7. But in order to meet that printing time, we have to be more or less finished in about 6:30. Now, it's an interesting story behind that, because as soon as it became apparent how serious this incident was, we then had to basically talk about reprinting the paper. But by that stage, the paper that we had put to bed, as the saying goes, as we had put to bed prior to 6 o'clock or at around 6 o'clock, it was already being printed. So you had the unusual situation on Thursday morning of the first edition, shall we call it, with, I think the story on the front was about the gold mine. That had already been distributed to the far reaches of West Tyrone, places like Castlederg, Drumquin, Ahayarn, Strabane. But then, whenever the reprinted version, it then was available down towards Omagh and more towards the eastern part of the county. So you have the situation now where there are actually two editions of the Ulster Herald, two versions of the Ulster Herald for that particular Thursday, the 24th of February 2023.
23rd of February, I think it was. The attack was on the 22nd, was it?
Yeah,
so it was the following day. And that in itself was a massive decision by the Ulster Herald to reprint the paper. But that was because of obviously the seriousness.
Oh yeah, it was, and like we did know, we knew quite quickly that this was a very serious event, and obviously we didn't know at that time whether Chief Inspector Caldwell was alive or dead.
How quickly did it sort of emerge that it was him? Like, he's obviously a well-known.
Oh, very quickly.
Very quickly. Yeah.
But I think going down the road, I knew that's who it was.
And can you tell me a bit about John Caldwell in terms of his profile at the time?
Yeah, well, he was very high profile, serving officer in the PSNI, probably aged in his late 40s at that stage, and had been involved in some of the most prominent investigations that, murders and other events that took place within the north from probably 2013, 2014 right through to 2023. So yeah, he was, whenever there was an incident to be, when there was a murder or some other serious incident happened, he was front and centre in terms of investigating it. He was front and centre in terms of any media appearances or anything like that.
So the attack, actually, he had just finished up with his son's football team coaching.
Yeah.
And what happened then? He had come out to the car park.
Well, it seems to be what happened was youth sport on a weekday night in the winter time is an especially busy location, because you have a running track, so you have people going round it. At that particular night, it was members of Omagh Harriers. You had various GA and soccer teams training on any one of the three pitches out there. So you had probably about 4 or 5 groups of teams who were there at the time that John Caldwell was shot. And those alleged to have shot him, he was at his car putting footballs back into the car when they approached him, and then he went on to the running track, which is only probably about 15 yards from where his car would have been parked, and obviously then he was shot multiple occasions. So that's what happened, and the attackers then got back into their car and drove away out through the main entrance of the facility onto the main Cookstown to Omagh Road.
It was obviously an incident that had massive repercussions politically, and DCI Caldwell was in a critical condition, but he was from Beara, your own home village, and there was a real positive response within the local community after the attack.
Yeah, there was a rally held in Omagh on first of all, on the Saturday morning following the attack. There was a march or a sort of a protest walk took place from the Beara Swifts home ground to the nearby home of the Beara GA club. So that had taken place, and then following that there was a protest which was held outside the courthouse in Omagh. So I suppose with all of these things, there is a there is a lot of the time a unified community response, and that was what happened on this occasion. And certainly there were several hundred people attended both of those events.
Yeah, so obviously the police launched a massive investigation on the attack, but it was May, almost 3 months later, actually just around 3 months later, that the first people were charged. What happened with the first court appearances in connection with the attack?
So it was the last week of May. 7 men were charged, and they sort of formed the core part of the investigation. And so it went into the details as Alan outlined. The cars arrived, 2 gunmen came out, they shot Caldwell. There was a third man who joined the gunmen, and then the cars had driven off and they'd been burnt out. 5 cars involved, 2 Fiestas, an Audi, a Transit. And there was another car as well. So since then, there's been at least 36 arrests, and there's been 17 people charged with different sort of parts of the investigation. And the investigation sort of breaks down into sort of 3 parts. There's the main body of defendants who are charged with shooting Caldwell, the actual attempted murder. Then all of the other sort of defendants are charged with the preparation of planning the murder or attempted murder. And then you have some sort of outsiders, 3 men from Derry charged with putting up a sign claiming responsibility for the shooting.
So there's been a lot of arrests and a lot of people charged, and I think obviously with the high profile nature of the attack, but it's now well over 2 years almost. We're not too far, 3 years since the attack, but there's been no convictions. So people, I think, in the general public are kind of a bit confused, and part of what we're trying to do here is just lay it out clearly where we're at with the case. But what do we know from what's been said in court in terms of the reasoning or the alleged motivation behind the attack?
Yeah, that's the sort of interesting part. You got to look at who's been charged, because some of the people who've been charged with the attempted murder and the preparation of the attempted murder are alleged high-profile new IRA commanders, and some of them are involved in separate investigations to do with alleged paramilitary action. But some of the other people who have been charged have had sort of professional criminal careers behind them, convictions for drugs and organised crime, that sort of stuff. But those people came from sort of unionist backgrounds. So in terms of the motivation behind it, I don't think it's too clear yet.
But do they think it was because of the localness of a lot of those people who have been charged, that there was an element of it was a personal issue against DCI Caldwell because of his work? He had investigated so many of people and criminal gangs locally, and so many different factions in terms of republicanism as well, that it's been said in court that there's alleged that these people might have come together to try and kill him.
Well, for some of the people, they grew up with Caldwell. They went to the same school. They were in the same circles. It might have even been some way sort of friends. But I do think it was a combined effort between paramilitary and organised criminals to make the attempt on John Caldwell's life.
And we're always keen to stress that it's an ongoing case, obviously, and these are allegations. But as we stand today, there's been no convictions for 2.5 years down the road. And in terms of John Caldwell himself, he made a good recovery last year. It was actually in September 2023. He received an award at the Sunday Life Spirit of NI Awards, and he spoke there briefly about that's the first time I think he'd spoken publicly. How has his recovery gone, and what do we know about his life since the attack?
Yeah, well, I suppose the thing about it is he has never actually spoken publicly about what happened on that particular night, and for obvious reasons, due to the ongoing investigation, it's unlikely that he will until that investigation is completed, whenever that may be. He was visited by the Prime Minister at that time in hospital and has been seen out and about at a number of particular functions during the 2.5 years since the shooting. One of them was a garden party in which he met the King Charles. He attended Omagh show, so he has been out and about at a number of events now. Since the shooting, I suppose he has retired from the PSNI. So as of today, he doesn't appear to be doing any particular work. Certainly not work in connection to police or anything like that. But he does seem to have made a relatively good recovery. Obviously, we don't know the full extent of what medical repercussions there will be from what happened on that night. But he is out and about within particular areas, and as I say, does appear to have made a fairly good recovery and has retired from the police. But the implications of what happened, I'm sure for him personally, wouldn't be particularly good, because when you're shot like that, it's bound to have a long-term traumatic effect on you.
So, as we stand, there's a lot of people before the court. None have been convicted as yet. There's still, just recently, we had 2 more men charged in connection with it. I think the police have indicated there's further potential charges to be brought. What do we know in terms, has there been any indication of how long this will take, or because of maybe it's been such a piecemeal investigation, stretching from May 2023 right up to, as I said, just new charges brought recently. Do we know in terms of, have police said anything about a timeline, or the prosecution said in terms of how long they expect this overall investigation to last?
I suppose there's 2 important considerations to make. It's delay and circumstantial evidence, and that's what's tying up the courts at the moment. The previous hearing, they said that the case file itself was 20,000 pages, and that was only the first edition of the papers.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Like as Callum says, it's 20,000 pages, and like at the time there was something like 180,000 hours of CCTV taken from various premises, both business and residential, not only in the vicinity of youth sport in Omagh, but far beyond there. So it really is a really extensive case. And I suppose the question would have to be asked is when exactly will it be finished? And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any real indication. There's probably dates in the future that they might aim to, but I can't see it finishing any time in the next 2 or 3 years, at least.
And it's such an important case from the PSNI point of view. Obviously, there was an attempt to kill one of their officers. They have put so much time and effort, as you were saying, Alan, into this. So it's important that there's a lot of the prosecutions happen in terms of from a police point of view, but we really are no further forward in terms of knowing when this investigation is going to come to a conclusion either way.
Well, as it stands in the courts, the last update from the public prosecution service was that they were aiming for the end of this summer for a preliminary inquiry, which is the last stage of legal proceedings before the whole case is sent to the Crown Court. But the big debate has been about delay, because over and over again they said that there would be decisions, they'd be further forward, and as you said, we're 2 years on and it hasn't even got to the Crown Court yet, because likely what's going to happen next is each one of them will have to go on trial. The trials might last for weeks, months, can't imagine we'll see any real convictions until 2 years' time. Next year, 2 years' time.
Well, as we all know, the wheels of justice turn slowly here, and this is a good example of it. But I hope that gives you an idea of where the case stands at present. So thank you, Al, and thank you, Cal.